Welcome back, sleepyheads. You've arrived right on time. History tends to reward those who move slowly. Before Silas steps into the streets, a word from the voice behind the clock. You know, the one who winds these journeys, listens to the gears settle, and lets the night do the rest. Rome, 44 BC. Caesar is dead, and the city doesn't know what it's supposed to be next. Power hangs in the air like incense after a ritual gone wrong. There's no speeches yet. There's no clear victor, just marble streets cooling beneath uncertain footsteps, and a republic quietly realizing it may already be over. It's the perfect moment for a quiet walk, when ambition exhales and philosophy finally gets a word in. If you enjoy drifting through history where power fades and legacy whispers, you already know what to do. Walk with us. Join the sleepy circle. Let's begin.
Chapter 1. Rome holds its breath after the blade. Welcome, listeners. I am Silas, your wandering observer of the hour's history would prefer we forget. If you enjoy my voice guiding you through humanity's more uncomfortable episodes, go ahead and like the video. It helps more dreamers, scholars, and mildly unhinged philosophers find their way here. And don't worry, I won't follow you through time. Unless you happen to live in 44 BC Rome, in which case the Senate is doing enough stalking already. Now, breathe in slowly. Let the air settle in your chest. We're stepping into a city still trembling from 12 inches of metal and a lifetime of ambition. Rome, the day after Caesar's assassination. A republic trying to decide if it wants to scream, faint, or start a civil war before lunch. Let's begin. The first thing I hear as I approach the Portico of Pompey is not mourning, not solemnity, not even the kind of calm that comes after catastrophe. No, it's the sound of sandals slapping marble at speeds that would impress even Mercury. Senators are fleeing the scene like startled starlings, robes flying behind them in panicked arcs. Some clutch scrolls, some clutch their chests, one clutches his wig, which, judging by the way it keeps tilting, was not made for sudden exertion. A young senator barrels past me, with the conviction of a man fleeing both guilt and cardio. He shouts, "It wasn't me," which is fascinating because I hadn't asked. The air tastes like iron and fear, sharp, metallic, vibrating with the echo of the blow that split Rome open. A few guards try to maintain what passes for order, which in Roman terms usually means shouting louder than the people panicking. It is not working. A pair of slaves drag a limp body toward the portico's steps, leaving a thin red smear behind them. Not Caesar, no, those men would be paraded, praised, or executed, depending on which way political winds blow, by sundown. This one must have fallen during the riot, Rome's version of collateral damage. Even death here feels like a footnote. The sky hangs low, heavy with the kind of gray that makes you wonder if the gods are watching, or refusing to. Somewhere a crow caws. That's either divine commentary or just a crow being a crow. But in Rome, people rarely make that distinction. I step further beneath the vast portico, its shadows long and strangely tender, as if the old stones are trying to cradle the chaos. Here, the smell shifts. Dust, sweat, blood, and the unmistakable tang of a city trying very hard to pretend it's not falling apart. A group of elderly senators cluster together, whispering in hisses. One mutters, "History will remember this day." Another responds, "History remembers nothing. People do, and people forget." A surprisingly stoic thought, considering the trembling in his hands. Above us the columns stand tall, uncaring, unmoved. They have seen Pompey rise and fall. They watched Caesar rise higher still. Now they watch both the ruin and the replacement forming in real time. There is something comforting about that indifference. Not cruelty, just scale. The stones know what the Stoics knew. Reality doesn't bargain. I follow the thinning trail of voices toward the Curia of Pompey. The place where the blade met flesh and Rome's spine cracked. The entrance is half blocked by overturned chairs, scattered parchments, and a few sandals abandoned mid-flee. Some men ran so fast they forgot they were wearing them. Inside, the air is still, heavy. A silence so thick it feels like stepping into a pool. There is no Caesar here. His body has been taken away, carried through the back to avoid the mob. But the imprint of his presence lingers, like a shadow burned into stone. A few bloodstains mark the marble floor, already darkening as they dry. The stains run in thin lines, like little tributaries feeding a larger river of consequence. I whisper because even air feels too loud in this room. This is where fate solidified, where ambition and envy conspired together, where reality became irreversible. Acceptance, the Stoics would say, is not weakness, it is clarity. And here, clarity is unavoidable. No amount of political spin, priestly incense, or senatorial denial will change the blade's work. Caesar is dead. Rome has already begun to rearrange itself around the empty space he left behind. A few senators return to the chamber. Braver ones, or perhaps foolish. But they keep their backs pressed to the wall, as if expecting more knives to come raining from the ceiling. One crosses himself in a habit he probably didn't realize he had. Another stares at the Senate chairs, with the look of a man realizing he might have just voted himself into either glory or a shallow grave. I take slow steps across the marble, letting the echoes trail behind me. The Curia feels cavernous today, like a mouth missing its tongue. The kind of hollow that makes you wonder how many decisions have been made here with less thought than a butcher gives a goat. The Stoics taught, you cannot control events, only the judgment you place upon them. Rome, however, is attempting the opposite. It tries to control the event by refusing to interpret it. Pretending it was necessary, pretending it was noble, pretending it wasn't a gang of wealthy men panic-stabbing the most powerful figure in the world because they feared becoming irrelevant. People resist reality not because they don't see it, but because it refuses to blink first. I step outside again, leaving the chamber's tension behind. Though it clings like smoke, on the portico the chaos continues. A group of younger men rush past me, carrying another wounded figure between them. He's breathing, barely, but his eyes roll with that glassy look of a man who hasn't yet noticed reality is winning. The men mutter prayers, curses, promises, threats, all directed at gods who likely have their hands full officiating history's newest disaster. As they pass, I consider how quickly rumor will reshape this moment. Already, 3 versions of the assassination circulate through the market stalls. One says Brutus wept before he struck. Another says Cassius laughed. Another claims Caesar didn't say, et tu, brute, but something closer to, really? You too, I cannot believe this. Honestly, I wouldn't blame him. The Stoics warned about clinging to illusions. But Rome has always preferred them over facts. Facts are heavy. Illusions are light enough to carry into political speeches. A senator pauses beside me, chest heaving. He squints, either in suspicion or simply because he's old and the world has suddenly become too bright. What opinion do you take of this morning's events, stranger? I answer the only way philosophy allows. That it has already happened. He stares at me as if I've spoken a riddle. Maybe I have, to a man who believes the world bends for his convenience. Acceptance is an exotic concept. He hurries off when another wave of screams rises from the street. Reality is chasing him, and reality has no patience. I step toward the Forum, but pause at the edge of the portico, letting the wind brush past, carrying dust, whispers, and the faint copper scent still lingering on my hands from touching the Curia's door. Rome is trying to breathe, but the air feels caught in its throat. This is what history looks like from the ground, messy, frightened, confused, dripping with the consequences of men who imagined themselves gods. This is what philosophy teaches us to do: stand still, observe clearly, accept fully. What has happened cannot unhappen. What is broken cannot pretend to be whole. What is done lies outside our control. But the way we walk through the aftermath, that remains ours. Rome, trembling and freshly wounded, does not yet understand that. But we will walk, slowly, quietly, stoically. There is more to see, and much more collapsing ahead. Chapter 2. Power without a master stumbles. The Forum Boarium greets me with the uneasy silence of a marketplace that doesn't know whether it's still allowed to sell fish when the Republic is bleeding. It smells of river water, old scales, and fear. Not necessarily in that order. The Tiber moves sluggishly beside the square, its surface a sheet of tarnished bronze reflecting a Rome that no longer matches the one people woke up expecting. Men stand in tight clusters, whispering fast enough to blister their tongues. A few merchants try to continue business as usual, because someone always does. But every shouted price sounds more like a question than a statement. I walk toward the line of soldiers gathered near the cattle pens. Their armor clinks with the twitchy rhythm of confusion. 3 of them are locked in argument, the kind where everyone points and no one listens. One soldier, broad as an ox and just as expressive, insists, "Brutus is the savior of the Republic." Another snarls back, until Antony says otherwise, and Antony carries more legions than Brutus has friends. The third rubs his temples, like a philosopher in pain. He mutters, "I don't know who's in command anymore." He says it softly, but the words drip into the space between them like oil into water, as if even acknowledging the fact might summon civil war from the shadows. I consider stepping around them quietly, but philosophy demands we witness. Their confusion is not surprising. Soldiers live by orders, by clarity. Remove the commander, and you remove the compass. The Stoics teach the dichotomy of control. You control your thoughts, your actions. You do not control politics, conspiracies, or the whims of wealthy men with sharp objects. These soldiers are discovering that lesson the hard way. "I don't care who rules," the youngest soldier says finally, voice quivering like a plucked lyre string. "Just tell me whose shield wall I stand in." He places his palm on his scutum, trying to steady himself, not physically, emotionally. He's doing what every good Stoic does when the world trembles, anchoring himself to the one thing still reliably his own posture. I pass them with a nod. They barely notice. Their world is shrinking inward as fear always forces it to. Up ahead, a crash erupts like a small thunderclap. Wood splinters. A horse screams. An overturned patrician carriage lies on its side near the temple steps. Wheels still spinning like they haven't yet accepted the accident is over. A noble family tumbles from the wreck, robes tangled, hair powdered with dust, pride leaking from them like wine from a cracked amphora. Their servant is already scrambling to retrieve jewelry strewn across the street, because Roman hierarchy persists regardless of personal disaster. A woman in expensive silk shrieks, "Do you know who we are?" She's directing it at the crowd, which is her first mistake. A fishmonger chuckles darkly. "Not anymore, Domina. Even the wealthy cannot control the judgment of strangers." The nobleman, face flushed, toga torn, attempts to regain composure. He stands, brushes off marble dust, lifts his chin, a pose he probably practiced in calmer times. But then a loose wheel rolls and bumps into his leg with comedic precision. It is a humbling worthy of Seneca. Even the privileged cannot negotiate with gravity. What can he control? Not the carriage, not the horses, not the crowd stares. Only the way he chooses to respond. To his credit, or perhaps his exhaustion, he sighs, laughs once sharply, and mutters, "Well, the gods have made their opinion clear." A Stoic spark, however faint. Fate happens. We accept, or we fight reality with the grace of a drunken centaur. I continue toward the Temple of Saturn, whose columns loom like ancient philosophers rolling their stone-carved eyes at Rome's theatrics. The steps are scattered with people climbing, kneeling, praying, shouting. Everyone's searching for a divine memo clarifying who is in charge now. A pair of priests argue over whether the treasury inside should be guarded more tightly or abandoned entirely. Their debate resembles two crows fighting over a coin neither can spend. A group of citizens huddles near the base of the stairs, speaking rapidly. What if Antony marches? What if Octavian returns? What if the Senate dissolves? What if? The favorite sport of the anxious mind. A mother holds her child close, whispering that everything will be fine, a statement philosophy might classify as aspirational fiction. I take a seat on the lowest step, letting the cool marble press through my cloak. The giant statue of Saturn looms behind the temple walls, bound in chains, symbolic restraints removed only during the festival of Saturnalia. Funny in a darkly cosmic way that even a god is kept in chains while Rome unravels freely. The Stoics would say, "You cannot control the future, only the discipline you bring into its uncertainty." Rome is failing at this today. A centurion strides past, barking orders that sound confident, but lead nowhere. Like a rooster, convinced sunrise follows him personally. Several soldiers follow, but their faces betray doubt. They march because marching is familiar. The direction, however, is guesswork. Power without a master stumbles. Rome is stumbling beautifully. From the temple steps, I watch an argument erupt between two wealthy men over whether the conspirators are heroes or traitors. They wave their arms dramatically, each insisting their perspective is the correct interpretation of destiny, because humans have always believed the universe shares their opinion. A philosophical truth drifts through my mind like the scent of incense. We control our judgments. We do not control the events that provoke them. Rome seems to be testing the limits of that maxim today. As the sun begins to dip, casting long amber shadows across the Forum Boarium and the temple facade, a hush settles briefly over the crowds. Not peace, just exhaustion. People stop arguing, stop running, stop pretending they understand the shape of the future. For one breath, the entire city seems to recognize the world has changed without their consent. And no amount of shouting will unchange it. A Stoic truth. A painful one. A necessary one. I rise from the temple steps and begin walking again, my sandals whispering over the stone like a soft reminder. Control yourself. Not the chaos. The streets ahead are darker, more uncertain, and filled with the kind of tension that precedes either transformation or collapse. But that is for the next chapter. Chapter 3. The city turns on its own. The closer I walk toward the Basilica Julia, the more Rome sounds like a wounded animal. Low growls, sudden cries, the scrape of sandals over stone as people move in unpredictable patterns. The Forum's polished marble reflects not the usual bustle of merchants and magistrates, but the jittery movements of citizens who no longer trust the ground beneath them. Fear, it seems, has become the city's current coinage. The basilica itself looms like a pale rib cage jutting into the sky, great arches casting long shadows that look suspiciously like bars. A fitting metaphor for a republic, learning how small its freedoms have always been. A crowd gathers beneath its steps. And crowds in moments like these rarely gather for anything wholesome. I edge closer. At the center lies a man, robe torn, cheek bleeding, arms shielding his head. The mob circles him with the jittery hunger of wolves that haven't yet decided whether they're hunting. Someone shouts, "Caesar, lover!" Another hurls a fist-sized piece of broken tile. Someone else spits with the dramatic flourish of a man who wants history to remember his contribution. The truth is obvious. He's not being punished for loyalty. He's being punished for proximity to an idea, to a faction, to someone else's fear. A woman with tangled hair shouts, "He feasted with Caesar's officers last Saturnalia," which could mean anything from politics to merely having good taste in dinner invitations. But fear does not distinguish. Fear invents. The Stoics teach that fear is rarely about reality itself. It is about the judgment layered atop it. The mob here isn't afraid of this man. They're afraid of uncertainty, of power shifting overhead, of a world without the familiar tyrants keeping their nightmares neatly organized. They cannot strike the senators hiding behind marble. So they strike a man who looks like he might have once spoken favorably of Caesar's haircut. The man on the ground lifts his head for one breath, a mistake, and a boot catches his ribs. He wheezes. The sound is thin, defeated, the kind you hear from an animal that has finally accepted its odds. I step closer, not enough to interfere, because interfering here is a shortcut to joining the entertainment, but enough that the mob's noise rings sharp in my ears. My voice slips out soft, meant only for listeners in another century. Fear is a craftsman with poor eyesight. It carves monsters where only men stand. Something shifts behind me, a murmuring ripple. I turn to see a small boy, tugging his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he whispers, "why are they hurting him?" The mother doesn't answer. Perhaps she doesn't know. Perhaps she does, and doesn't want to say it aloud. The child will learn soon enough that mobs do not need reasons, only excuses. I leave as the shouting grows louder. Violence has a scent, like iron warming in the sun, and the air behind me reeks of it. The Via Sacra pulls me forward, the sacred road glimmering faintly beneath a haze of dust, kicked up by hundreds of frantic feet. The street feels charged, like the city itself is grinding its teeth. Ahead, I see another commotion, but this one carries more venom than fear. A soothsayer, robed gray with age and arrogance, stands backed against a column. A group of youths encircles him, their expressions caught somewhere between fury and the smug thrill of having chosen a target incapable of hitting back. "You said nothing of this," one shouts. "All your omens, all your birds. You warned no one." The old man raises trembling hands. "I did warn him," he croaks. "I told him, beware the—" A slap cracks across his cheek before he finishes the famous sentence. "Liar," another boy snarls. "If you truly saw anything, why didn't you stop it?" The irony could sink a trireme. Rome, moments ago, celebrated the conspirators for killing Caesar. Now it punishes a prophet for failing to prevent the very thing they applauded. Passion rarely checks its own logic. The Stoics would say, passion is not truth. It is the smoke that rises from burning judgment. The soothsayer tries again. "I am not a god. I interpret signs. I cannot—" He stops when someone grabs his collar. For a breath, I think they might kill him. Not because he deserves it, but because killing someone would momentarily distract them from the terror curling in their guts. That is the danger of ungoverned emotion. It demands release, not resolution. I step into a nearby alcove, letting shadows drape over me like a thin cloak. The boys shove the prophet once more, but their anger sputters like a torch starved of oil. One finally scoffs, gives the old man a contemptuous shove, and stalks away. The others disperse too, muttering that he's not worth the effort, which is precisely how Rome has treated wisdom for generations, only now it's literal. The soothsayer falls to his knees, palms flat on the stone. His breath trembles. He stares at the ground, as if the future might graciously write itself there, clearer than entrails or flight. Patterns of birds. I crouch a few feet away. Not close enough to frighten him, but close enough to honor the moment. Passion, I whisper, is a wild horse. It will take you where you do not want to go if you climb onto its back. The man lifts his head slightly, though he cannot hear me. He simply breathes, long and slow, reclaiming what little dignity the street has left him. That is Stoicism at its most practical. Step back. Name the fear. Let the passion pass through you instead of into you. But Rome today, Rome is inhaling everything. As I rise and continue up the Via Sacra, I glance back. The basilica, the mob, the prophet, all blur in the light of a sun that seems to be watching the city with narrowed eyes. Everywhere passions churn without direction. Fear births anger, anger births cruelty, and cruelty, once fed, develops a taste for its own power. The Stoics would say the city needs reason, discipline, temperance, but the city is not ready. The city is trembling. The city is turning on itself, and we are only halfway through the walk. Chapter 4. Shadows march through the heart of Rome. The Forum of Caesar always feels like a place that remembers its architect too well. Columns standing with the posture of soldiers, marble steps worn by ambition, statues holding their poses decades longer than the men who inspired them. But today the air here is wrong. Thicker, sharper, it tastes of sweat, iron, and something that sits uneasily between terror and expectation. I step into the open plaza and immediately freeze, not from fear, but from the sheer mass of bodies barreling across the avenue. Gladiators, not the arena kind, polished and choreographed for patrician entertainment. These are the private household versions, enormous men hired as living deterrents, half loyal, half feral, all muscle. 6 of them push through the forum like a storm front, leather straps snapping against their chests, tattoos twisting with each stride. Their eyes search not for a fight, but for orders. Orders that Rome no longer has. Behind them, a slave jogs breathlessly, trying to keep pace while clutching a bronze crest that probably once told them who they belong to. Now it only tells them who they have outlived. I step back toward a column as they pass. The ground shudders under their combined weight. A woman grabs her child and ducks behind a market stall. A merchant drops a bowl of olives that scatter like frightened marbles. One of the gladiators catches my eye, just long enough for me to see a truth that would make any philosopher proud. He is terrified. Yes, even mountains tremble when they realize the map has been redrawn, without asking their permission. Temperance, the Stoics say, is mastery of the self, not the world. And these men, they have been taught to master everything except themselves. They march with their chains rattling, not as restraints, but as reminders. Reminders that violence, once trained, is easier to unleash than contain. I whisper for listeners across time. Strength without self-mastery is merely a louder form of weakness. The gladiators vanish down a side street, but their footsteps echo long after. Rome has many ghosts, but none haunt so loudly as the living. I follow the narrower path toward the Argiletum, the bookseller's street, a place where the smell of ink and papyrus usually fights a polite duel with the smell of humanity. Shops spill their wares into the open air, scrolls stacked like coiled snakes, wax tablets hung from beams, philosophical treatises chained to tables so the public won't accidentally borrow them forever. But today, knowledge takes second place to superstition. A priest stands in the center of the road, incense bowl shaking in his hands. The smoke rises in frantic spirals, as though the incense itself is trying to flee. He mutters a chant, voice cracking. Ash flecks his robe. He swings the bowl harder, wilder, the rhythm of a man trying to exercise his own spine. Children peer from doorways. Booksellers watch with tight mouths. A few citizens drop coins at his feet, hoping divine intervention might be running a sale. Courage? No. This is panic, dressed in ceremonial clothing. The priest lifts his bowl toward the sky, shouting, "Save Rome from shadow! Save us from the knives in the dark!" The bowl slips from his grasp. It hits the stones with a clang and rolls, spilling burning incense across the road. People yelp and scatter. A wax tablet begins to melt, dripping thought onto the street like a philosopher having a nervous breakdown. The priest falls to his knees, clawing at the smoke, trying to gather it back into the bowl, as if he can reverse the unraveling of the world by sheer desperation. The contrast is almost artistic. Back at the Forum, gladiators marched with monstrous strength and trembling discipline. Muscle over mind. Here, A priest flails with trembling weakness and no discipline. Mind, overwhelmed by fear, neither is free, neither is stoic. Temperance, contrary to popular gossip, is not about denying pleasure or refusing wine at dinner parties. It is the art of keeping the inner reins tight, directing your actions rather than being yanked around by impulse, fear, or superstition. Rome is failing that lesson spectacularly. I step toward the priest and gently retrieve the rolling incense bowl before it hits a drainage gutter. He grabs it from my hands with the gratitude of a drowning man clutching driftwood. His eyes dart wildly. The gods are angry, perhaps, but the Stoics would say, if the gods are just, they cannot be angry. If they are angry, they cannot be gods. I don't say that aloud. He looks like he might already be negotiating with the edge of sanity. The smell of burnt resin hangs heavy now, mingling with the sharp scent of panic. A shopkeeper kneels to salvage what's left of his melted tablet, cursing in 4 dialects. A boy picks up a fallen scroll, unrolling it just enough to read the title. Epictetus, he murmurs. I raise an eyebrow. Ah, I whisper to you, a future Stoic in the making. Rome could use a few. The boy rolls the scroll carefully and places it back on the table, delicately, reverently, as if understanding that ideas, unlike people, might actually save this city. Around us, the Argiletum begins to settle. A man sweeps embers away with a sandal. A woman grips her shawl closer and mutters about omens. Booksellers straighten their wares as though tidying knowledge might tidy the world. The priest stands shakily, clutching his incense bowl with renewed, trembling purpose. He bows to no one, then scurries toward a nearby shrine, seeking meaning in the ashes. I watch him go. Temperance, I say softly, is not the absence of fear or desire. It is the art of not letting either drive. If Rome could hear, perhaps it would pause. But cities rarely listen until the rubble settles. The shadows lengthen, the kind that creep before storms, before verdicts, before civil wars, pretending they are philosophical debates. Caesar's body has cooled, but Rome has not. The Forum of Caesar behind me trembles with displaced power. The Argiletum ahead flickers with displaced hope. And in the space between, I walk, quiet, observant, a student of a world learning its limitations the hard way. Chapter 5. Prophecy, Panic, and the Edge of Civil War. The Suburra district always feels like Rome, exhaling, dense, hot, noisy, packed with enough humanity to repopulate the city twice over if everyone suddenly decided to clone themselves. Taverns spill wine and arguments onto the street. Laundry hangs like surrendered flags between balconies, and every alleyway smells like a negotiation between spices, sweat, and questionable decisions. But today, the usual chaos has teeth. I step into a wide lane where people have gathered, heads tilted upward. Their faces are carved with the anxious expectancy usually reserved for eclipses or tax collectors. Above us on a creaking wooden rooftop stands a woman, hair wild, arms raised, eyes wide enough to fit entire tragedies inside them. She screams into the sky. Blood will run through the streets. Jupiter showed me the Tiber will swallow Rome whole. Her voice cracks with the kind of intensity one normally hears from prophets, drunks, or very committed actors. Around her, clay tiles tremble dangerously under her stamping feet. A man beside me whispers, "She's seen visions." Another mutters, "She sees the wine jug too often." The rooftop prophetess continues, voice rattling the beams. 2 suns, 2 kings, 2 Romes, which could mean civil war. Or she might simply be terrible at astronomy. Stoicism teaches that wisdom isn't fortune-telling, it's clarity, a mind trained to separate what is seen from what is merely imagined. The woman on the roof, she has erased that line completely. She scribbles over reality with divine ink. I watch her sway dangerously, near the edge, and think, somewhat unhelpfully, Wisdom does not scream, and it rarely stands on roofs. A child tugs at my cloak. Sir, is she telling the truth? I kneel to him. No one knows the future, I say. But everyone can watch the present. Carefully. He nods, staring at her with the seriousness of a tiny senator. A sudden crack splits the air, the roof beam groaning under the prophetess's theatrics. Gasps ripple through the crowd as she scrambles back to balance, whipping her hair like a vengeful spirit. She points randomly at the street, shouting, "Prepare yourselves, all is lost." A man drops his basket of figs in sheer panic. There it is. The power of imagination over perception. The Stoics warned that humans do not suffer from things themselves, but from the opinions they form about those things. Half this crowd fears her words, the other half fears what they might mean. Either way, fear wins. I continue uphill toward Capitoline Hill, leaving the prophetess behind like a cracked statue abandoned in the sun. The climb narrows the crowds into desperate lines, families tugging carts, merchants dragging belongings as if fleeing an approaching army. Civil war hasn't even begun, yet everyone is already reacting as if it has. At the base of the ascent, I pass a row of market stalls that look like they've survived a barbarian invasion. Only the barbarians were the merchants themselves. One man smashes pottery on purpose, shouting, "If Rome burns, no one will rob my inventory," which is a level of logic that should be studied cautiously and from a safe distance. Another throws amphorae into a wagon, hands shaking so hard he drops more than he loads. A butcher is shouting prices that rise with every breath, as if the economy is tied to his pulse. 2 denarii for a slice. No, 3. Gods help us, 5. Wisdom, the Stoics say, is the ability to see things as they are, not as fear paints them. But Subura right now. Subura is finger painting with panic. I pass a merchant wailing over a knocked-over spice stall. Saffron and peppercorns scatter across the street like the world's most pretentious battlefield. He throws his arms in the air. This is the end, mark my words. If every rumor were true, Rome would have ended 900 times before lunch. I help him upright one jar. He stares at it, as though I've just rescued a family relative. "Why save it?" he asks. "What's the point?" I answer with the gentlest Stoic barb I can muster. The present moment still exists. That's reason enough. He blinks twice, slowly, like a man rebooting, and nods. A breath returns to him. It is not prophecy that Rome needs. It is perception. The climb steepens. The noise fades into a kind of panicked hum. Capitol Hill's steps rise before me, carved by hands that expected people to ascend them with ceremony, not stampede energy. As I reach the midpoint, I stop. From up here, the city stretches wide. Subura's frantic streets, the Forum's heavy silence, the distant smoke from torches burning where they shouldn't. Rome looks disoriented, like a giant trying to walk after losing one of its legs. Wisdom, the Stoics taught, is practical judgment, knowing what is real and what merely feels real. A prophet screams ruin from a rooftop. Merchants smash their livelihoods. Citizens flee ghosts of wars not yet declared. Rome is eating shadows, starving on rumor, and yet the breeze is calm. The sky holds steady. The stones beneath my feet remain the same ones Caesar walked. Reality is not trembling. Only people are. At the top of the steps, a small group whispers urgently, "Antony will seize power." "No, Brutus." "No, Octavian." "No, gods help us," all three. Each version worse than the last. Each offered with absolute certainty. Each based on nothing more than the speaker's personal anxieties. Where wisdom observes, panic invents. Civil wars do not begin with armies. They begin with rumors, false stories, misinterpreted signs, prophecies shouted from rooftops, merchants who act as if doom is already here. Then someone panics louder. Then someone with a sword listens. Then someone dies. Wisdom is the antidote to all of that. Quiet, steady, outrageously unglamorous. I whisper into the dusk. For listeners across centuries, fear imagines the world falling apart. Wisdom watches it more closely and usually finds it still standing. Capitoline Hill overlooks a Rome in the nervous hour before darkness, before decisions, before the knives return or the armies march. A city at the edge of civil war, because its people cannot yet tell the difference between danger and imagination. If you're ready, say Chapter 6. Where republics rise or shatter. The last stretch of the Capitoline ascent feels different from the chaos below, as if Rome itself is holding its breath, waiting to hear whether it still has a future. The Capitoline Hill's summit rises like the spine of the city, and on it the crowd thickens into a tense mass of bodies and whispered fears. People stand shoulder to shoulder, not because they trust one another, but because they're afraid to stand alone. Here, silence is not the absence of sound. It is a force, heavy, violent, the kind that pushes against the chest. Somewhere below us, the Suburra still howls with rumors. Somewhere at the Forum, senators bicker like caged roosters who have forgotten they're supposed to lead an empire. But up here, every voice has been stolen by anticipation. A woman near me clutches her shawl around her shoulders, knuckles white. A young man grips a dagger he barely knows how to use. An elderly couple stands hand in hand, their faces carved by decades of famine, taxes, and triumph. Together they look like Rome personified, bruised but unwilling to bow. No, one knows what the Senate will decree. Will the assassins be praised as liberators? Will they be hunted as traitors? Will Antony seize power? Will Octavian claim the future? Will Rome fracture again, as it always seems ready to do? The Stoics called this moment the trembling between what has happened and what will happen, the place where courage must stand upright. I whisper into the tense air. Courage is rarely dramatic. Usually it just means not running away. A boy beside me overhears. Is that philosophy? He asks. Yes, I say. But don't let that ruin it. He snorts once, quietly, respectfully, and returns his focus to the Senate doors. Even humor has to whisper today. The doors groan open, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to remind everyone that wood and hinges can decide the fate of thousands. A hush falls so sharp, it feels like a blade pressed against the throat of the whole city. A delegation steps out, senators in white togas with purple borders, faces pale with the weight of history. They look like men who've aged years in hours. The oldest among them holds a scroll, a decree. Someone near me mutters, "This will decide everything." But the Stoics would say, only your judgment decides your peace, not politics, not decrees, not even the shape of history. Still, difficult advice to embrace when half the city may burn by nightfall. The senator clears his throat. Even that sound ripples across the crowd. He unrolls the scroll slowly, so slowly I suspect he's hoping the parchment itself will offer him a way out of speaking at all. Then, finally, the words. The Senate declares that the assassins of Caius Julius Caesar are neither heroes nor saviors. Nor are they enemies of the state. Their actions shall be judged in accordance with the safety of Rome, and Rome alone. His voice carries no triumph, no condemnation, just exhaustion, a compromise, a political contortion, the first trembling attempt to keep Rome from tearing itself apart within a single sunset. The crowd exhales as one, a single massive quivering breath. Not cheering, not booing, just breathing. Courage is not always in the battle cry. Sometimes it's in the exhale after disaster. The young man with the dagger lowers it. The elderly couple squeezes each other's hands tighter. A mother lifts her child to see the senator whispering, "Remember this. Rome chose not to die today." I look across the sea of faces, fearful, worn, determined, and realize something quietly profound. Justice isn't always loud. Justice is the moment a crowd chooses to witness the truth instead of distort it. But the decree is only part of the story. The Stoics would say justice must be lived, not read aloud. And here, by simply showing up, peacefully, bravely, Rome's people are performing the oldest Roman duty, pietas. Loyalty to the city, to community, to something bigger than their fear. Even if they don't agree with the decree, even if they don't trust the Senate, even if they're terrified of what comes next, they stand, they stay, they hold the line of civic presence. This quiet refusal to abandon the city is courage. Not the battlefield kind. Not the heroic death in a poem kind. The ordinary, stubborn, human kind. The senator continues reading, his voice trembling, but firm. Rome shall not fall to division. The Senate will maintain order. The people will remain under protection of the Republic. A woman shouts, "Then protect us." A man near her shouts, "Then protect yourselves." Yet no one draws a blade. No one throws a stone. The arguments rise and fall without igniting. It is imperfect unity, messy unity, but unity nonetheless. The Republic trembles, but it does not shatter. Above us looms the temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, its great columns casting long shadows across the hilltop. Romans say the temple watches over the city. Tonight it looks like it's waiting, judging whether its people will divide or endure. I climb the final steps, lantern low, watching the crowd gather at the base. They look small from up here, not insignificant but delicate. Like the idea of Rome itself, the temple doors remain closed, yet the presence of it, the weight, the grandeur, the ancient promise, calms the square more effectively than any decree. Duty is not just loyalty to the gods, it is loyalty to one another, to stability, to the fragile idea that a city can survive its own passions. Courage stands with a shield. Justice stands with truth. Duty stands with presence. And tonight, Rome stands. The torchlight flickers across the marble. The last light of day drifts over rooftops. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, as if announcing that the city is still alive. I step away from the temple, breath steady. History has not chosen its victor yet, but it has chosen, for the moment, not to devour itself. In a city cracked open by murder, the people themselves have become the glue. Shaken, frightened, imperfect, but unbroken, I lower my lantern, voice soft, as the first stars appear. Rest easy, sleepyheads. The sleepy circle holds its place for you, until we wander again.